I grew up in the small town of DuPont, Washington, and my father was a CID, or a Central Intelligence Division military officer for the United States military. He taught me a lot about investigations and how criminals tend to think. After I graduated high school, I went to college to study criminal justice, just like my father and many other members of my family. Then, in 2003, I started my own private investigator business. When I had a personal encounter in 2016 with something whose existence I could not account for, it was at that time I became interested in the phenomena of the supernatural. I have now investigated things of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and evidence collection cases for the past 6 years. In fact, many people have gotten in touch with me to share their own personal stories. I've conducted investigations into cases spanning the majority of Washington state. I have been the one to physically recover multiple pieces of physical evidence, including hair and fur samples, and even tracks. So, I am trained in looking for the signs of their presence, and have successfully done so. My encounter occurred while I was spotlighting deer on some local land right near Old Fort Lake, about a 15-minute drive from Olympia. I was out with my 12-year-old son, and we had an ATV as our base of operations. I drove the vehicle to the top of the hill and walked about 100 yards into the woods and set up our command post, as we like to call it. My son was acting as a spotter, standing in the middle of an open glade with a high-powered flashlight, searching frantically for deer. I was walking through the woods with my headlamp on and a spotlight in hand when I heard a loud, deep, guttural growl from about 10 feet to my right. I turned immediately, showing the spotlight in that direction. What I saw startled me enough to take my breath away and freeze me in place momentarily. I only saw the back end of a deer, but it was massive. Its hind legs were as thick and stout as small tree trunks. The hips were very wide, and the hocks looked like they protruded outward, much like a dog's. The tail was very short. It wasn't a normal deer by any means, so my mind immediately traveled to the other logical conclusion: a bear. I thought to myself, a bear has chased my son. So I screamed out his name and shone the spotlight in his direction. He immediately responds and yells, "Dad." I turned my head back to where the deer was, and it had vanished. The area is thick with vegetation, so whatever the animal was, it immediately ducked behind a tree and ran off into the woods. I shined my light around looking for tracks, but it was dry and sandy, so there was no sign of anything. My son came running over to me, and I asked him if he had seen the animal that I had seen. He said no, but it sure was loud. We both chuckled at the event, which really shook me up at the time, but I was worried that it might have been a bear. After reassuring myself that this was not a bear, I began to think more about the animal itself. It had been no more than 10 feet away from me. This animal was massive, and its hind legs were thicker than a deer's, but not as big as a horse's. The hips were wide, the hocks protruded outward like a dog's, and the growl was very loud and deep, unlike a bear's roar or a typical deer noise. After the initial encounter, and realizing this was not a bear, I looked for tracks of this animal as best I could. The ground was hard clay, so there were no visible foot impressions to be made out other than my own from walking around. I did find one branch break where a small tree limb had broken off. I shone my light on it and saw the white wood was now brown where a foot had stomped down. That was no print, however, as the ground is too hard for that to be evident unless there are leaves or needles on the ground, which this area did not have. Even though I handle cases that involve cryptids or monsters or anything like that, most of my cases stick to conventional investigations, like cheating spouses and insurance fraud. Yet, this one case involved both a cheating spouse and, dare I say, a Bigfoot. I was contacted by a woman who was convinced that her husband was cheating. She gave me a photo of him and some basic information. It wasn't long before I tracked him down to a motel where there indeed was another woman. It was one of those small motels just off I-5 and surrounded by woods. I positioned myself just right across the street next to a small gas station, taking some pictures from across the parking lot of them coming out of the room together, getting in his car. I do own my own photo development, and I was just about to give them to the wife when I noticed something in the background of one of the photos. It looked like something I'd never seen before. After enlarging it, I could see that it looked to be some kind of ape-like creature, covered in hair, with a snout like of a canine. I showed the picture to the wife, and she freaked out. She told me that her husband had been having nightmares about a creature like that, and she was convinced that it was real. She wanted me to find out what it was. I told her I would look into it, but I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I began doing some research, making some phone calls. Eventually, getting in touch with a retired FBI agent who had experience with this sort of thing. I sent him an email with a photo and asked him what he thought about it. He shared with me a few of his own accounts. He wouldn't tell me everything, but he did tell me that he had heard about this particular creature in the Pacific Northwest. He told me he would be concerned about my safety and the safety of my client if I continued to follow up on the investigation. Now, I had more questions than answers, and I agreed to stop cooperating with the wife. I have never seen her since, but I kept looking into it on the side. One of my employees is an amateur cryptozoologist. I asked her to look at the picture and see if she can find anything interesting about it. She went through all her books and discovered accounts of people having run-ins with the beast in the same region I was in when I took the picture. She also found a group on the internet of people talking about the same creature I had photographed. They had documented encounters with the creature. Strangely enough, they didn't call the creature Bigfoot. They said it was a Sasquatch, which is a different type. They told stories about how Sasquatch would appear in moments of crisis and could be seen as a warning from God. I thought that it sounded a little too much for me. I'm not religious, so I couldn't put the connections between a creature and God in the same category, but I decided to keep following up on it. They also answered some questions about how to deal with the creature. I learned that shooting it would be useless because bullets wouldn't affect it. They advised that if you come across one, you should stay as far away from it as possible and not attempt to photograph or video it. Burning it was a recommendation made by a participant in the forum that you should take. He claimed that if you destroyed one, it would not be able to return to this life. I was skeptical. The following day, I noticed several military vehicles in DuPont. The Joint Base Lewis McChord military installation is nearby, so I didn't think anything about it. I heard a knock on the door, and when I opened it, there were two military MPs. I asked them, what was this about? They responded that they had been asking questions of people in the area if they had seen anything unusual, and I asked them, why ask me? They replied that others in the community had suggested my name. They were told by several people that I was a PI specializing in supernatural investigations. They asked me if I had any actual evidence of their existence in my possession. I replied no. They wanted to know if I would go with them to answer a few questions. I agreed and was soon escorted to a waiting SUV. I sat in the back seat with one of them, answering his questions about what I had seen and heard. The others drove us to a motel located off of I-5, where I had taken the picture that the creature was in. I had asked, how did you know about the photograph and the location from which I took it? They did not respond and just ignored the question. I thought to myself, I bet it was the FBI guy. But I did not give him the information about where I took the photo. I wondered if they had been monitoring the computers in my office ever since. I also believe that they may have been following me prior to this, as something spooky happened 2 days prior while I was in my backyard at night. I heard a very loud, deep growl that was extremely close, less than 50 feet. I shined my light around and saw nothing, but I could see my dog was visibly shaking. This animal, whatever it was, seemed to be looking for a way out of the area. Saw the dog shake, and then heard branches breaking, as if something was running away. That was very, very large. We found footprints in the area that were much larger than a man's. They were much more elongated, 6 toes, and were very long. Large, weight-bearing pads. The stride of the tracks was much longer than a human's. I did tell them that the animal in the photo was massive in size. They took a cast of the footprints and many photos. All the while, they were in communication with somebody else via radio. Anyway, I asked the MPs if I could tell the others about this. They told me to keep quiet about it for now. I agreed. They gave me a card with a case number on it. I thought that was a little strange. Well, this morning, the day after, there were several more military vehicles in my town. I saw them at a local coffee shop and outside the grocery store. They definitely were looking for something or someone. I have a friend that works for Washington who used to be assigned as security for sightings like this and informed me that they are actively seeking these beings. They have been receiving calls from all over the west side of our state and even up into Vancouver, BC. They want to know about any sightings or evidence collected. He said that they have also been looking for this species since the 60s and are not going to give up. A local Native American who resides in this region has witnessed these creatures and has photographs of them. He is a well-known outdoorsman and hunter and is also quite wealthy. Officials from the government have approached him and requested that he continue to keep an eye out for these creatures as well. Later that same day, I received a sighting report from a good friend of mine who lives in northeast St. Clair, Washington, about 15 miles away. He said that yesterday, he and his son were on their boat, fishing for salmon in the Nisqually River just inside the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge, when they saw a large figure standing on the shoreline off in the distance. He said it resembled a tall man with long hair. He grabbed his binoculars, and in order to get a good look at him, he said, "Man, that's when I could see it was not human. It looked just like a big hairy beast." He said they watched it as it waded into the water. It began to cross the river, and it looked like it was swimming across to the other side. But there were no splashing or other erratic movements. It moved slowly. When it reached the other side, it stood there for a moment. It looked as though it was looking around for something. Then it let out a loud scream, almost like a yell. But it sounded low and resonated. That's when another one of those things came out of the woods right in front of it, and they both stood there on the shoreline. To our astonishment, both of them turned our direction in the boat, and together they let out a scream at us, as if to acknowledge our presence. They both walked into the woods and disappeared from view. I don't quite know what to say, except I don't think it was a coincidence that all of this happened in such close proximity to each other. Are these animals becoming more bold and aggressive? What involvement does the military have in this? Do they have some sort of awareness that they are being protected by the government? We may never know, but I thought you should be aware. Hey, what lurks beneath? I recently found your channel a few months ago, and I enjoy your content. I've always been interested in the paranormal, and have had a few encounters myself. I recently had an encounter I cannot explain, and want to share it with you. I'm the manager at a local restaurant here in Colorado. I'm originally from here, and grew up hiking and camping in the mountains. I've always loved the outdoors, so I decided to stay in Colorado after college. I was working the early shift at the restaurant yesterday, and we were busy. I ran back and forth between the dining room and the kitchen and did not have time for a break. At around noon, One of the waiters came up to me and said that a group of people in the back really wanted to speak to me. I went to their table where 4 men and women were. They were all dressed in business casual clothing and looked like they were in about their early 30s. The woman was holding a folder. She told me they were from the FBI, and she introduced herself as Agent Wild, and they needed to speak to me about an incident that had happened a few weeks prior. I didn't know what to say. I told them I would be happy to talk to them. I sat at their table, and the woman opened the folder, handing it to me. She showed me a picture of a man and asked if I had seen him. I didn't recognize him, so I shook my head. She then shows me a picture of a woman. I recognized her as one of the customers I had served a few weeks ago. Agent Wild told me that the woman in the picture was a missing persons case, and that she had gone missing in the woods right near where I live. She said they were looking for any information I might have about the incident. I told them I didn't know anything, but I gave them my contact information in case they would need to speak with me again. Then, Agent Wild gave me her card and told me to call her if I saw or heard anything suspicious. Thinking nothing of it, I went back to work. The whole thing did shake me up, though. I didn't know what to think. I hoped the woman in the picture would be okay. A few days go by, and I was walking in the woods near my apartment, and I saw something I could not explain. I was walking on a trail when I heard a noise off to my left. I stopped and looked, but I didn't see anything. I began walking again, and I heard the noise. It sounded like something was following me. I turned around and saw a large, dark creature in the shadows, watching me. It was taller than a human with a longer snout. It was not a bear and didn't look like any dog I'd ever seen. I stood there for a few seconds staring at it, trying to figure out what it was, but I couldn't. Then it began to walk toward me. I turned, running back the way I came. I was too afraid to look back, even though I could hear it following me. I ran as fast as I could back to my apartment. When I returned home, I told my roommates about what happened. They, of course, did not believe me. They just laughed. I wasn't sure what to think about what I had just seen. I know I saw something out of the ordinary, but what is it? So I just tried to forget about it. That was until I saw it again the next time I went hiking. It was standing in the same spot, watching me again. Also, I turned and ran the other way and did not look back. I don't know what it was, but I'm convinced it's following me around. I contacted the FBI agent who gave me her card, but she said there isn't anything I can do unless they have proof. I told her I was being followed, and she said she couldn't do anything unless I had it on tape or film. I asked her what she thought about it, but she didn't speak about it. I had decided not to go hiking again for a while, especially in the woods near my apartment. 2 days go by. I get a call from the FBI agent Wild. She mentioned that she would like to meet me at my apartment. I agreed, told them I would be there at 6 p.m. At exactly 6 o'clock on the dot, Agent Wild and 2 other men knock at my door. The men introduce themselves, Agent Moore and Agent Wagner, showing me their badges and identification. Agents said there was nothing to worry about. Still, they had received a report of another missing woman, someone from an apartment complex nearby, and wanted to follow up with me in help of their investigation. They had received reports from several witnesses of large animals in the woods near my apartment, but that's all the details they got. They believed that there was correlation between these unidentified animals and the missing persons. I informed them what had happened to me, and they seemed more interested in hearing about it this time. They began to ask me specific questions, like where did you see it the first time? What did it look like? Can you take us back to that location? What did you hear? How close were you when the sighting occurred? Where were you the second time you had the sighting? Etc. They asked if I would be willing to assist with their investigation by leading them actively into the territory, or the encounter where I had this sighting. They asked me to tell them exactly where we were going so they could get a map from their vehicle. They wanted to GPS the site and get every coordinate. We had walked only a short distance when I noticed something in the woods in front of us. I stopped. I motioned to them and whispered, "It's over there." "What did you see? Where is it?" asked Agent Wild. "It's over there," I had answered, pointing into the woods. No more than 25 yards, I guess. Agent Moore held his arm out towards us, as if he were telling everyone to stop moving forward. "I need you guys to back up right now," he shouted in an aggressive tone. The other agents pulled out their weapons. "There's something up here with us, isn't there?" yelled Agent Wagner. "Yes," Moore responded with. "Who would be up here besides us?" "Well then, who are these footprints from?" "These tracks lead straight down the trail without stopping until they reach your trail leading up. We walked up the trail with Agent Moore in front. We didn't notice it until suddenly stopped and told us to get back here right now." He spoke in a serious tone that nearly suggested he already knew what we would find and wanted us out of the way before finding anything more. He would not have reacted like this unless someone else who did not belong was there. There were no footprints behind them. It appeared as though something had sprung out of the trees and dashed into the space between these large oak trees. After our group passed, something began to run up the trail. We heard branches snapping behind us as we moved back down the trail. We saw people moving toward us from the top. There was no time for whoever or whatever it could have been to seek cover elsewhere earlier. After hearing a massive, thundering crash behind us, we turned around to discover Agent Wagner lying on the ground, violently trembling, convulsing, and possibly suffering a seizure of some kind. Wagner suffered serious injuries when whatever got him had leapt from a tree branch overhead, striking downward and landing directly on his skull. Somehow he didn't die. He was knocked out cold but not dead when he hit the ground. We had to carry him to the trailhead where the FBI agents called 911. This had been the most frightening experience of my life. Agent Moore later told me that they searched with dogs for days but never found any trace of who it may have been. He also showed me a map with several locations marked where other missing persons were last seen before disappearing without a single trace or even remains. All of them were very close to my apartment complex and the woods nearby, by no more than 2 miles at absolute max. I no longer hike the woods close to my apartment, nor do I go hiking alone. I know what I saw was not human. I do not know what it was, but for the FBI to get involved, this must have been serious. Anyway, I thought you might find this interesting.